Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in to Studio C70, Committee of 70's Election Day programming. I'm Sam Foreman. I'm the PA Civics Coordinator with Committee of 70, and I'm thrilled today to be joined by the co-chairs of the PA Civics Coalition, Jim Gerlach and Joe Huffle, both former members of Congress, to discuss PA Civics and Pennsylvania's General Assembly. Welcome, Jim and Joe.
Thank you. Good to be
Yeah,
with you.
glad to be here.
Wonderful. So figured we could dive right in. You can, introduce yourself as well as you begin, but I'll ask the first question and you can introduce yourselves and then give an answer. So for people unfamiliar with PA Civics, could you explain the organization's goals and what motivated you as former U.S. Congressman to serve as the co-chairs? Figure we can start with Jim.
Thanks, Sam. PA Civics started some years back after former members of Congress Association sent out a memo to former members around the country asking them to consider getting more involved in their individual states in the promotion of civics education in their state. So that prompted Joe and I to then begin talking with the Rendell Center at the University of Pennsylvania and other organizations like the National Constitution Center and Committee of 70 to see what we could do to form a coalition of organizations to really focus in on how we can work together to promote civics education in Pennsylvania. And around that time, the legislature had passed and Governor Wolf had signed into law Act 35, which mandates now a civics assessment each year of students between grade 7 and 12 to determine what their civic knowledge and skills might be. So between Act 35 and this desire of our organizations who are partners to PA Civics, we're all working together to try to figure out ways to promote and advance civics education in our schools and also in our communities. And it's been a great process and a great experience so far.
Yeah, I can only add to those great opening comments by Jim that I think both of us, as practicing politicians in our past, came to understand that people don't have the civic knowledge that they ought to. Some people do, but too many don't. And we wanted to try to, after we got out of politics, to give something back to try to turn that around. And happy to work with the state, which has this civics assessment requirement for the schools. And there's other ways I think we can try to promote civics around the state. So that's what we're all about.
Thanks, Jim and Joe, and we'll ping pong back and forth. So go, Joe. Maybe you can take this one first. What role do you believe schools should play in preparing students to be informed and active participants in the democratic process?
It's an essential role for sure. I mean, you hope that young people are exposed to, political discussions around the dinner table at home or with their families or neighbors. You hope that they're paying some attention to what's happening in their community. But learning about civics in schools is essential. It's critical. And I think all of us understand that civics education is declining in the school systems. It's lost whatever focus it had in the past. And I think it's really important that we turn that around. And that's really what PA Civics is all about.
Yeah, there's polling every year that unfortunately demonstrates that far too few citizens have a real solid knowledge of our structure of government, the powers and responsibilities they have as citizens, and most importantly, if they understand all of that, how they can be impactful in their communities and in their states and in our country to try to solve the problems that we have. And so, if you believe in the old maxim that great citizens are not born, they're made, the making of great citizens has to start not only in the home, but also in school, where they're being educated with other students around them and being educated to understand the problems that they will have as they grow older and how they can all work together to solve those problems and deal with those issues collectively as citizens of our great country. So the schools are critically important in that process.
Thank you much, both of you. Maybe Jim, we'll go back to you for this one to start. How would you describe the state of civic education in Pennsylvania?
Well, we're trying to get a really good handle on that. I remember taking civics in ninth grade when I was growing up in Western Pennsylvania. I actually had a great civics teacher, Mr. Bashini. Uh, and I know my kids going through school in the Downingtown School District had good civics teachers. But I think it really varies from school district to school district, how much time and effort those teachers and schools, excuse me, are able to put into a solid curriculum and a solid program. And with the growth of STEM related programming in schools in the last few decades, sometimes I think civics has gotten pushed away or pushed out of being a core subject. So, again, it probably varies from school to school, district to district, but collectively, there's no question that we need to put more emphasis on civics education in Pennsylvania and work with our teachers and work with our educators generally to make sure they have the right skills and the right programming to really educate those students.
My sense is that the status of civics education is poor. Not the teachers who are trying to do that, but it's not a part of the core curriculum anymore. There are not dedicated classes on civics as there were in many districts in the past. It's lost its focus. It's not a priority. And so overall, the quality of civics education is poor, and that's got to change. And we all understand in this challenging society and challenging world, we've got to have people who are paying attention to government and involved in civics. And that's why this correction and work in the schools and in the community is so important.
Thanks, Jim. Thanks, Joe. And Joe, you mentioned, the many teachers that are teaching civics or implementing civics in the classroom, how hard they work and how much great work is being done. We know is being done in classrooms across the Commonwealth. What support can administrators and educators anticipate from PA Civics to enhance their efforts in promoting civic education and providing that in the classroom?
We were trying to get more tools to them and an opportunity to meet together and learn from each other and from experts about the best ways and the best practices to promote civics. PA Civics plans to hold three teacher conferences in the next school year in three different regions across the state to give teachers an opportunity to come together and learn from each other and hear about the best practices that are being conducted. And the teachers are doing the very best they can. You're right. They're talented and dedicated. The school curriculum and the process isn't giving them enough room and enough focus or enough funding or enough tools to do it properly. And we hope to fill that space.
Yeah, and I'd like to add that there's a lot of schools around the country that really have taken on civics education and are coming up with pretty exciting ways, new ways to teach civics. What worked back in I don't know, 1970 or 71 when I had civics is not the right approach today necessarily. And so, what are those new ways that teachers can take what needs to be taught to students about our government, about citizenship responsibility, but teach it in a, excuse me, in a way that's going to engage students and excite students and really, really impact them. So if we can help with teacher development, if we can help with teacher resources and teacher skill building around civics education, then we're accomplishing something.
Thank you both for the excellent answer and a lot to look forward to, certainly on as the coordinator, I can say on the PA Civic side. I want to go back to the bigger picture we were kind of discussing before with legislative measures that we're looking at. Jim, you mentioned Act 35 being kind of the civics education law in Pennsylvania. I'm curious, what are some legislative measures that could be implemented to bolster civic education in PA, in your opinion, whether it's something that exists somewhere else or something that you're particularly interested in? And if you could also mention how PA Civics is working to advocate for those initiatives. So, Jim, we'll start with you.
Well, with Act 35 now in place, we want to start collecting data and analyzing data as to how well it's working. what assessment tools are being used by teachers across the state. What are the results from those assessments? How do they compare and contrast with other schools in the state? So we have a ongoing process now. We're trying to set up a working group with the State Department of Education and some legislators in Harrisburg to really begin developing that information flow and analysis. And then from that, hopefully we'll get a better understanding of the state of play, so to speak, of civics in Pennsylvania. And then from that, what policy recommendations can we make to our legislators and to Governor Shapiro to continue to improve civics education in Pennsylvania? So this fact-finding, information gathering is our next step. And then we're going to use that to continue to promote new ways, new ideas to build civics out further here in Pennsylvania.
Thanks, Jim. And I just do want to clarify before I see if Joe has anything to add there. Act 35 is the requirement for Pennsylvania students to be assessed in civics and U.S. history at least one time between grades 7 through 12. And you can find out more about that on the PA Civics website, pacivics.org. There is an Act 35 page there, which connects to the Department of Education's toolkit page about that for educators and families and students who are interested. Joe, anything to add about legislative measures that could be implemented to bolster civics?
Well, we're still trying to gather the information, as Jim said. The question is, should Act 35 be strengthened? Should mandates be included, not just that an assessment be given, but what kind of assessment? Should the state take a stronger role in guiding the schools in doing these assessments? Should funding follow whatever mandates might come down from Harrisburg so the districts have the resources to do the civics upgrades? So all that's up in the air, but I think we're going to be very interested in encouraging the legislature not to rest on its laurels. Act 35 was passed about 6 years ago, but we see a bright future and a role for the state to do more.
Thanks, Joe. And I want to pivot a little bit to discuss your experience as elected officials in the state of Pennsylvania. So for a little context to you and the viewers, every election cycle, C70 facilitates student candidate interviews. We call them Studio C70. We pair candidates with schools, and they get interviewed by students. So I'd love for you to shed some light on why it's essential in your view for candidates and election officials, not just during the election cycle like we're in right now, to engage directly with classrooms, providing that invaluable experiential learning opportunity, with the primary coming up and in general. Joe, would you like to go first?
Sure. Well, in my experience, the more kids are engaged, the better citizens they're going to be, the better they can hold politicians accountable to them. You have to know the process. You have to know how government works in order to challenge the politicians who you're dealing with. You need to know what they're capable of, what process they have to go through, how a bill becomes law, so that you can make sure they're doing their job and that you can respond to them when you're speaking to your elected official. As a politician, I used to love going into classrooms, and I tried to do it every week or two because I would learn from the kids, hear what's on their minds, and often what's on their parents' minds. And I also felt I was, doing my part to help them better understand the government and their future role in it. So the sooner we get involved, we get kids involved at a younger age. One reason why Act 35, maybe there should be more than one assessment during the middle school and upper school years. Maybe we should be doing assessments much more frequently to help kids learn and encourage. So it's an essential role for politicians to get into the schools and for the kids to figure out how to ask the politicians good questions.
Yeah, teachers play, certainly a very important role in teaching basics to students about our structure of government, about elections that happen every year for different offices at the local, state, and federal levels, and how that process works generally. Or after somebody gets elected to office, what is his or her job responsibility, say as a legislator or as a county commissioner or as a state legislator. Uh, uh, but it's also really important that students hear from folks that are actually practicing and undertaking that job every single day from a real world experience standpoint. The people that come in like Joe and I did the same thing, went in into the schools. You get a lot of interesting questions from students, and you're able to answer those questions in a way that really makes them better understand or allows them to better understand what goes on in the real world every day in a legislature, in a Congress, in a courthouse, in a governor's office. So it's important for teachers to teach all aspects of civics to our students across the state and across the country. But you add on top of that the ability of candidates and elected officials to come in and answer real world questions from those students. That's even more powerful as part of the education process and is a very necessary part of the process.
Thank you both. And I want to close by talking a bit about the importance and impact of Pennsylvania's General Assembly, in which you both served. So, 203 reps on the ballot and half of the Senate. And, sometimes, these middle child of government offices don't get the attention they deserve. So I have a two-part question about that to close. First, how do representatives and senators in Harrisburg impact the daily lives of Pennsylvania's voters? And looking ahead, how can voters stay informed about the activities of the General Assembly? Jim, would you like to go first?
Well, important decisions the government makes, local, state, federal, are being made every single day, with or without citizen input and citizen participation. So it's important for citizens to understand that they can have a real world impact on their elected officials just by communicating with them, engaging with them, and offering their thoughts and views on legislation. So citizens should always feel as if they engage with their elected officials, they're having an impact on the process. The legislators themselves really want to hear from the people that they represent. They want to be educated. Legislators come into a public office, regardless of whether you're a state legislator or a federal legislator, with some expertise in some area because you did something professionally, but you don't know or an expert on thousands of issues that come before the legislature in Harrisburg or Congress in Washington. So you need to be educated by people in your district so you can better manage the issues and better understand what your vote should be, either in passing or trying to stop a piece of legislation moving through the process. So that's an important thing for citizens to understand. And from a state level, from the taxes that you pay at the state level to the healthcare policy that the state engages in, to economic development programming and initiatives that the state's involved in, citizens ought to be concerned not only with what's happening in Washington, D.C., but what is happening in Harrisburg, because Harrisburg decision making, from legislators to the governor to the executive branch to the courts, all have a day-to-day impact on citizens in Pennsylvania, and therefore citizens ought to be engaged with those elected officials in Harrisburg and make sure those elected officials understand what the views and perspectives are of those citizens.
I would just add, on any day, going about your normal activities, going to school or going to work, whatever, you probably are covered by and maybe bump up against more state laws than federal laws. The topics that Jim just mentioned, traffic laws, all kinds of stuff. The state government has a very big impact on your daily life as a citizen. So all the more reason to pay more attention to that and demand of your state legislators information. Most of them have pretty good websites. Most of them send out newsletters to their constituents. But I think the voters have to ask for info and demand it and go to town meetings and the like, because the more you know, the better off you're going to be.
Thank you so much, both of you, for the time and for sharing so much information about PA Civics and also just really important information about what the General Assembly does and why it's important. Before we close, as we close, I should say, we just got a couple of minutes left. I want to turn it back over. If there's anything we haven't discussed you'd like to add as we conclude the interview, Jim, anything?
Well, again, the role of citizens in our society today is more important than ever. And so people ought to understand the power they have as citizens. So they need to understand our system of government. They need to understand the role they play. And then they need to actively engage in their community, in their state, in our country to try to help the decision makers and elected officials make the right decisions. So the power of citizenship is incredibly important to understand and to utilize to help our country move forward.
Thank
I
you,
get
Joe.
Jim's right. I mean, public officials do respond to inquiry and pressure from their voters. Next week, I'm going to speak to my granddaughter's second grade class in the Abington School District, and I've been thinking about what to talk about, and it's about explaining to them about how you make rules. They have rules in their classroom and how they're supposed to behave. Well, that's what Jim and I used to do in Congress and also before that in the state legislature, making the rules. And involvement, doesn't begin in just in or end in second grade. It's something that citizens have to be involved in throughout their lives. So that's what we're promoting here. And, we got a lot of work to do and it's fun doing the work.
I will thank you both so much again for spending some time with me today discussing this important work with civic education and your experience as legislators. Thank you, everyone watching, for spending time with us today on Election Day. Committee of 70 is a proud member of PA Civics and a lead organizer. Please visit our website at pacivics.org and enjoy the rest of the Election Day programming. Jim and Joe, thank you very much.
Thank you, Sam.
Thank you.